Thank you all for joining for this breakout session. I hope you've all been able to enjoy our kind of annual member meeting so far. This one, I've had a few different names for it, but decided with kind of a what's next after the next generation climate bill to focus on how much work we need to do across sectors to build the kind of sustainable built environment that we need for the upcoming decade. If we are going to have a functioning society, and two, a livable planet, two things that go hand in hand. And I'm delighted to have with me three great speakers who will help us, who will kind of share some of their insights on these issues. So I'll call you each by name if you want to just briefly kind of say a quick intro to yourself. Cabell.
Hello, yes. Hi all, happy to be here. Cabell Eames, I work for Better Future Project 350 Mass. I'm their legislative and political manager. I use she, her pronouns. Thanks.
Awesome. And then Jared.
Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Jared Johnson. I'm the Executive Director of Transit Matters. Sorry, my plans changed last minute, so I'm joining you from outside, but happy to be here and really excited to share my insights.
Awesome. Thank you. And then Yanisa.
Hi everyone, I'm Yanisa Techagumthorn, and I'm repping two roles here. One is I founded the political team for Sunrise Boston, which is the Boston hub for the Sunrise Movement. And by day, I also work as a transportation planner for a consulting firm called Nygaard, and I primarily work on public transit projects.
Awesome. Yeah, so a great intersection of important issues. So as people who may have been following the legislature saw that the legislature is going to soon pass a modestly redrafted version of the kind of the next generation climate bill, next generation roadmap, setting climate policy for the ensuing years. So Cabell, do you want to tell us a little bit about what does the bill do and what does the bill not do?
Yeah, there's a lot that it doesn't do. I will say that. But, and that's what this legislative cycle is all about. It's putting the teeth in the bill, this legislative cycle, because the bill, which was S9 and is now S30, God help us, it just keeps evolving into all of these different numbers and no one can keep track anymore. But I think significantly what it did do was that it first set us up to be able to purchase more wind power, which is substantial because it will bring us to 5,600 megawatts. That's a really big deal. It also increased the RPS, which is the Renewable Portfolio Standards, which is how much a sector can buy renewable energy. And it strengthened the language of environmental justice, communities, and population, which is very important because for too long we know that environmental justice communities are kind of like sacrifice zones, right? So this bill kind of puts them in a place where, if you are talking about putting in a building sector that is polluting, you can't just do that. Where in the past, you could just slip it in. Now there are mandates around how that process actually happens, if it happens, which it discourages. And it does also, there's something that's significant here that there was a big fight with the Baker administration over with the legislature, and that is the 45 to 50% by 2030. How do we get there? And our secretary of EEA said that it was political posturing to say 50%, which really, really angered me because nothing could be further from the truth. And that was rejected by the legislature. It did stay at 50%. And that is a really fantastic thing. And I agree with Barrett. I believe that on Earth Day, our climate summit happening in DC, that Kerry will put the nation on track for 50% by 2030, which is what the IPCC report called for. So again, this bill is, as I've said to Jonathan, it is the runway, it is not the plane. What we need to do in this next legislative cycle is build that plane. And there's a lot of really great bills that have been filed this session that will actually do that.
Awesome, that's really helpful. And quickly, for people who don't know whom you were talking about, when you mentioned Barrett, who is the person you're referring to?
Thank you. So Senator Barrett is the chair on the Senate side of the TUE, and he was also on conference committee for this particular bill. It had 6 members, and he and Tom Golden. Tom Golden is no longer the chair of the TUE, and the TUE is the Telecommunications, Utilities, and Energy Committee, which is where a lot of these energy bills go to die. And so, but Golden and Barrett were really kind of steering that ship. And but Barrett, puts out a lot of really great information, particularly on his website and such. So Senator Barrett is whom I was referring to.
And so I'm going to go from Yanisa to Jared and then back to you, Cabell. What legislation are you most excited about for the current 2021 to 2022 cycle? About legislation that you think can actually help us achieve those goals and us to have kind of the sustainable built environment that we need?
Yeah, so I could not pull bill numbers because the State House website was broken today. So I'll just speak in more generalities. But I am—
That is perfectly fine.
Yeah, I saw that Senator Monacore released a really robust transit omnibus bill that had provisions for things like making buses fare free and just increasing revenues to improve transit services statewide. So I'm pretty excited about that. And I think Cabell might talk about this a little bit more, but I'm really excited about bills that are coming out of the Massachusetts Renewals Alliance, like a series of organizations there. And a lot of those are centered around creating jobs behind a lot of these things we need to do to improve our infrastructure, like improving housing electrification and improving our food systems, and just looking at how to provide that just transition, to provide that job training for people to do the things that we need to do by 2030, by 2050. And then I'm also pretty excited about some fleet and transit electrification bills in the State House as well.
And quickly, for people who aren't familiar with the term, what does the concept of just transition mean?
Yeah, so a just transition means that as we're transitioning to a more renewable economy, there will be people who could be out of a job, like oil workers, people like that. And we want to ensure that people who are displaced from their jobs by things that make our world greener, that they have the opportunity to be placed and trained for new jobs. So because it's not their fault that they're working in an industry that's so polluting, we're targeting the higher ups, the executives, and not the workers, and we want to protect the workers.
Awesome. Jared, what legislation are you most excited about for this upcoming session?
Yeah, well, just like Yanisa, I'm also excited about Senator Boncory's, I think he's calling it a new deal for transportation, as well as some of the fleet electrification bills. And some of those are setting some really aggressive targets for the MBTA to electrify the bus network by 2030, and then to electrify all of commuter rail by 2035. So excited about that, as well as some bills to actually give folks subsidies for electric bikes, because while EVs are definitely an important part of the solution, we have to realize that even with the subsidy, there are going to be a number of people who can't afford to buy an EV and to own and operate it. And so, giving folks that option to have a zero emission and affordable solution, I think is really, really important.
Great. And I'm seeing one question in the chat. I want to bring it up in case Cabell or Yanisa, you might be able to answer this about stretch codes. That was a big flashpoint in the the climate bill going before. Lee's in chat is asking about how when Cambridge tries to pass stronger rules around buildings, that they hit up against the state building code. Where will that stand if the bill gets passed?
I can go. So
Yeah.
It's my understanding that language was actually strengthened in this last bill that came up just this past week,
Mm-hmm.
that it was actually clarified. So just to be straight here, Baker put out a huge statement about all of these revisions that he wanted to that bill. And thankfully, the majority of them were rejected. And the only ones that were accepted were the ones that were literal edits. And when I say an edit, the word would say change and he would put climate, and they were like, okay, we'll take that. So they really gave him very, very little, and actually worked with a lot of the sustainability engineers to put more clarifying language about how cities and towns can further stretch their stretch code. So it's a really, it's a really great bill. And, if it weren't for, I have to say this, we have never been in this position with Baker, the legislature. They usually really like to coddle him. And this is not the case this time. It is actually quite the opposite. They are not interested in working with him. I don't know if it's because, and I see that Rep. Owens is here, if they are just infuriated by what's been going on with the vaccine rollout, the Soldiers Field home. He declared war on teachers last week. It seems to me that the legislature is positioning themselves to endorse his predecessor, whomever that might be, because it is an election year. And, I was on Massey's campaign and we couldn't get them to work with us at all. And it seems really, really different this year, which is quite remarkable.
And then Cabell, bills that you're most excited about for the current legislative session.
Yes, okay. Wow, well, there's a lot, but I too am really excited about Mass Renews Alliance. I'm going to put this information in the chat for y'all because it's a lot. But they have filed 3 bills, and let me just tell you a little bit about who they are really quickly, because it's unprecedented that these people are working together, because they've never done this before. And this is thankful to Senator Markey, because the idea for this came from the Green New Deal. And the Green New Deal is, as we know, an infrastructure bill, right? It's it's a jobs bill. It's a new deal, so to speak, for Massachusetts and the nation. Without that, this probably would have never have happened, but thankfully it did. And so Mass Renews Alliance came together, and they are environmentalists, they are unions, they are environmental justice organizations. It is Sunrise, so it is youth. We've actually pulled in some disability partners as well. And it's growing, and the list is growing. We're talking to Indigenous partners, like it is growing by the day. And it's really exciting because I don't think the legislator has ever had to take on multiple groups with multiple constituencies. So it's a really exciting organization. It's not a C3, it's just a bunch of groups working together to file legislation, and they've filed 3 bills. Thank you for that. The website's in the chat. They filed 3 bills in Massachusetts. It's a regional effort. So it's not just Massachusetts that are filing these types of green infrastructure economic bills, but the ones that we filed, there's one for building retrofits, there's one for food justice, and there's one that sets up grants for farming. So there are 3 different bills. Corey is a theme here because he's on one of our food justice bills as well. And so it's the building jobs with justice is one, that's Pacheco and Robinson, and she's a champ as well. And then there is the food justice with jobs, and that's Corey, and that's Madero. And then we have the frontline justice food bill, and that's Pat Jalen. So, and there's a House docket for that too. I think that's Mancini that filed that one. So I'm going to put some information in the chat for this because we are having an advocacy day training on March 22nd between 6 to 8. And I'll put this in the chat for y'all to come, but where we're going to go through the bills. We're going to call some legislators. We're going to email some folks. Thanks to Rep. Owens, he's already co-sponsored these bills, but I am really excited about the mission and these bills mean.
So when you were talking about a few things there about kind of in changing how we do agriculture, changing kind of like the residential sector, and which reminded me of, it's like, and all of these things would be investing in communities, and would love to hear folks' thoughts about how can we use this moment of where we're thinking about how we're investing in like an economic recovery coming out of the kind of the COVID-induced recession, of how we can use that as an opportunity to invest in the infrastructure that we need to both kind of to expand the infrastructure we need and to do so equitably and sustainably. If we want to, I'm happy to wait. Let's do Jared, Yanisa, Cabell.
Yeah, I think there's a huge opportunity, to think about expanding transit. I think one of the key things that has, really emerged as a real thread through the pandemic is just that, we've been devoting far too much of our streets, far too much of our space in cities to cars, and so, we've got to set up alternatives for people, because I think, one of the key, barriers to to having mode shift, where we get more people out of their cars, is just having transit be, not just available, but just to be, accessible, to have it to be where, you can show up to, to bus stops, and, the bus is coming every 5 minutes. It's got to be abundant, and you've got to really give people, you've got to give them another choice. And so I think this is a clearly, an opportunity to invest in transit, not only to expand those alternatives, but also to create jobs. So I'm really excited about this moment.
Yeah, I know. I just expand on what Jared's saying too. I think something that COVID, just putting on my transit planner hat, something that COVID has shown us is that it's basically like where transit is needed the most. So looking at like bus routes and seeing like where buses are still really full. And you can see do the same thing with streets, but especially like buses. And as we like recover, as we come back to this like post-pandemic world, it's really important to like learn from that and learn where those disparities have existed during COVID, and like invest in them in full force, rather than just doing this rather than trying to remember what we did in 2019 and like keep investing the same way. Like we should be using COVID to pinpoint where we need like major investment in our transit system and other types of infrastructure, in housing. Like how do we do that in a way that really fixes and goes against like what we did in the past, so that the same disparities don't exist into the future.
Yeah, and I'll just to echo what everybody is saying. I mean, COVID was the kind of the shock and awe for a lot of legislators too, I think, because, for the first time, I had heard that there were some legislators that had never had the type of calls that they had had. And they, we have a lot of legislators that have been in office for 25 years, even through 9/11. They had not had this type of reaction of just full on just fear and panic from their constituents. And from the legislation that my organization has filed, we've worked very closely with Senator Markey, and he has refiled the Climate Bank. And the Climate Bank is set up to fund infrastructure projects, not just in Massachusetts, but nationwide. And Biden also, the Build Back Better is real. That's $2 trillion. That's a $2 trillion plan that is coming, that's upon us. So I think that, we have a partnership here in the federal government for the first time, because, 2010 was the last time we had the Senate, the House, and the presidency. And it's, in my opinion, from what I'm seeing, that our federal government is taking climate and inequality seriously, and that there's more to come in a partnership. And I'm just thankful that we're here, but we can't take it for granted, but it is here, it is upon us.
Okay, quickly unmuting myself. So one thing that I've often been thinking about, really kind of coming out of COVID, is that so amidst kind of all of what's like the terribleness and tragedy, there was a kind of, particularly in the beginning, when we realized, oh look, there are fewer cars on the road. That's a good thing. That leads to cleaner air. That leads to more space for pedestrians and for cyclists, etc. And there's a real risk that at whatever point, if it's later this year or if it's next year, when kind of all of the different kind of restrictions go away, all of those cars will be right back on the road, and possibly new ones. What do we need to be doing to make sure that that doesn't happen, and that we can, and to be able to steer things, especially, and I'd say in Massachusetts, knowing that we have a governor who really doesn't care about transit, as he like repeatedly shows time and time again. What are things that people need to be doing and need to be asking of their elected officials at different levels? Let's do Yanisa. Let's see. I'll start with. Let's do Jared, Yanisa, and Cabell.
Awesome. Yeah. No. It's. I I think we need to really be talking about bold solutions. I think that's been one of the things that's missing. And so we really need to talk about, building transit expansions in areas that have long been underserved. I think it's about, doing, big projects, like transforming our commuter rail. And like I said, really giving people those options and then I think one of the other things that we do have to do, it's going to be a tough conversation, but we've got to have a conversation about, about really bold solutions like, congestion pricing or tolling, where we're going to, at some point, the gas tax is not going to pay for, it's already not paying for infrastructure. And so we've got to look at, okay, well, gas tax has only gone up 13% in the last 25 to 30 years, while MBTA fares have gone up 300, 400%. We've really got to look at, like I said, giving folks the options, but then once they have those options, we've got to really think about how we're allocating our road space and just what things we're signaling to people by having highways just be free. So I think we've really got to look at it. And yes, to Mark's question, the Bon-Corey bill does propose a modest gas tax increase, and I believe it reinstates some of the things like a commission to study congestion pricing.
Yeah, and I would actually add that traffic is already kind of back and in full force, and that's really affected certain communities a lot more than others. Like, I think there was a study done a couple of years ago that basically saying like Chinatown is the most polluted place in Massachusetts, and like other Black and Brown communities kind of follow similarly. And I think like when we look at how we change our transportation system, it's like important to keep those communities in mind, because past transportation decisions and past infrastructure decisions have really impacted these communities. And like the Southwest Expressway, and that was going to go into Roxbury, for example, like it already cleared 500 homes and people who live there, right? And I think when we talk about making like big transportation and infrastructure changes, it's important to like make sure whose voices are heard the most. And these voices are the ones that are gonna be relying on transit the most already anyways. And we need to make sure that we're like investing in a way that uplifts these communities. Also, another point I was gonna make was just like a lot of these like transportation changes seem really big, but there's also a lot of stuff that are more at the local level to like transit is a great replacement, but so is walking and biking, because I feel like people are taking more and more short trips just through driving, and there's like a lot of things that a city can change, and in terms of improving sidewalks that are not like, they don't have to be glamorous or like cute in any ways. I know like outdoor dining has made like city centers cuter, but it's just improving sidewalks where there are no sidewalks will get us very far, so people feel like they don't have to get like into a car to go half a mile.
And then Cabell, anything you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say that I'm glad that there are folks or organizations actually like GM that are committing to net zero, right? They're not going to be building cars anymore that take gas, which is great, but it's still, an EV is not affordable. So if you're going to get serious about something like this, you've got to make EVs affordable for the average person, because right now they're not. And, I will also say that studies have proven that the people that have the most impact on our emissions through their travel are not the low income or even moderate income people, but they are the very wealthy people who can afford the EVs. So we have to redesign not just our transportation, our sidewalks, also, I mean, let's think about people who have disabilities. And if your sidewalk is not accessible, how do you move around? There's a lot to dig in here, but I'm happy to see that manufacturers anyway see that they see the writing on the wall and they're on board, because that's going to help.
Yeah. Well, and I just wanted to echo on Cabell's point. The Streets blog Massachusetts, which is a great resource for breaking down these kinds of things. the main editor there, Christian, posted a story about where these EV subsidies are going. And so, I mean, that's the other part too, is it's like, the administration can talk a good game about, oh, we're getting folks into EVs, but if you don't redesign the systems and you don't take into account income, you're just going to be, reproducing the same results. And that story from Christian noted that I believe it was something like 70% of the more EV subsidy money was going to high income communities where the average income was significantly over the area's median income. So we've really got to think about if we are going to get moderate and even some low income folks into EVs, we've got to set up not only the programs to pay for it, but we've got to answer really tough questions like, how do you charge an EV when you live in a triple decker in Dorchester or Springfield? Are you just going to string an orange extension cable across the sidewalk? So we've really got to be thinking equity has to be a part of all of these programs. So just wanted to echo that point.
I want to pick up on a point that Yanisa made before about what can happen on the local level, because I think that's such an important point, that it's that like really on any policy area that there are things that you can be lobbying for on the national level, the state level, and the local level. And I would love to hear from all of you, or what are the things that people could be asking of cities and towns here in Massachusetts, of how we can have better transit, how we can have greener housing, how we can have like less pollution, kind of across the board. What are the top things you would love to see cities and towns do? And since Yanisa, you're the one who started that briefly, I'll let you start.
Yeah, definitely. So like I said before, improvements to walking and biking, and just like a recognition in terms of like who needs to walk and bike the most. And like, just a side note, like I feel like when we're thinking about like cyclists, we have this image of this white man in like full workout gear biking around, but really it's like usually like older like people of color who are trying to get to their jobs and can't afford a car. Like that's who we should be planning our biking infrastructure for. But then in terms of transit, cities have a lot of jurisdiction over bus lanes and things that will help make transit more reliable, faster, and then like bus stop amenities. So like making it easier for people to wait at a bus stop, like shelters and seating and garbage cans, things like that, can really improve the like experience of riding transit and like make it feel like you're not waiting as long, which is like small but significant when you're trying to get more people to ride transit. And then in terms of, I just wanted to add a little note about housing as well. Like I feel like, I mean, as you all know, we have this regional housing crisis, and in terms of cities, like there's a lot of responsibility that cities have to take to basically create more housing, create more affordable housing in their own jurisdictions, and not just push the problem to like outer suburbs or inner cities. Like there's cities themselves have to all come to the table to like tackle the regional housing crisis and affordability crisis.
Great. Cabell and then Jared.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole host of things that cities and towns can do, and there are so many different avenues. I mean, I know of towns that have declared climate emergencies, and so sometimes that kicks off, other actions to be taken that couldn't have happened otherwise. Brookline is a perfect example for what you can do as far as gas hookups, right? And that whole effort behind no new construction having gas hookups. I'm on the energy committee in my town, and I know that that's something that we're looking at. Community agriculture is another one that's really incredible and incentivizes the purchase of renewable energy. And also community solar is really exciting. And that's something that renters can take advantage of. But, there was a study that came out recently from I think it was Mass Inc. around energy efficiency, and how the polling showed that people wanted to have energy efficiency and had no idea how to navigate that program. So I would empower cities and towns to take that on and and have some education around how all of that works, because it is incredible how counterintuitive it is. And we need to be able to speak the language of the average person, not to mention the fact that a lot of this policy language does not translate into other languages. So you can't talk to someone who doesn't speak English the same way that you talk to your English speaking neighbors. Like, all of these things have to be reworked if we're going to have a transformation of our infrastructure and of our systems.
Yeah, I think one of the things that can definitely happen at the local level is transit-oriented development. What Yanisa, one of the things Yanisa was talking about is that responsibility for cities and towns to add more housing, and the most efficient way to do that and the way that's best for our planet is by transit-oriented development, housing, and not just housing, but housing and everyone's essential needs right there in walking distance of the train station or bus station or whatever. That's got to be a key element of it. But one of the things we have to make sure that we're doing there is that it's got to be equitable transit-oriented development. We can't have it just be higher income folks that are living right near the train, because they're less likely to use the train anyway. So you've got to have that, and you've got to be thinking about that, again, equity, that we've got to have the people who are, like I said, most likely to use transit to be close to it. And one of the ways that we do that, one of the ways that we do have developers include more affordable housing at transit-oriented development sites is by tackling parking. One of the things that has really been clear, all the data shows that when you build parking spots, you get cars. And so when we're talking about in communities that are close to the T, we've just really got to be pushing the message that every new parking space, is just going to cause more traffic. And so we've really got to be pushing back on that and really thinking about that impact. So equitable transit-oriented development, and then tackling parking.
Yeah, actually, if I can
Yeah,
add
no,
on
go.
here. Yeah, in terms of parking, that's also another area that cities can have a lot of control over, because it's usually part of zoning or whatever parking policy. So finding ways to discourage car use through potentially like higher fees for parking, but also not having to require parking minimums for new construction, because that just takes up a lot of space that could be more housing. And like cities have this power. Like my job does a lot of parking studies all the time, where we look at where we do a comprehensive look at all the parking in a city, like how do we encourage people to use different lots, how do we encourage people to park less, and like how to make it less confusing for everyone to park as well. So like there's a lot of parking is a key thing that cities can do.
And on Yanisa, like the getting rid of the parking minimums is great too, because that's one that you can apply to practically any community. Any community can get rid of parking minimums, because that then means, there will still be buildings and things built with parking lots, but just giving people that choice is really key. And it's one of the only ways we're going to solve the housing crisis.
So we have 10 minutes left. So if people have questions in the chat, you've been great at putting them in throughout, but do please put them in so that we can ask them. One question that I was thinking of asking, and I'm going to also use a hook of some of the recently made comments, is that one of my favorite lines that 2014 gubernatorial candidate Don Burrick would often use was how every system is perfectly designed for the results that it gets. And I think that's a perfect way of even thinking about stuff really when it comes across the built environment, especially with the points about parking. And it's even thinking of, like, Yanisa, your point about how if it's hard for people, if it's confusing to people to park, they spend more time trying to park, and like that's itself more emissions into the air. But the question I wanted to ask is, next year we'll have a gubernatorial election statewide. What's the one thing you would want to ask anybody running for governor in Massachusetts in 2022? If you had one question you could ask of candidates. Well, you all, let's see who. If anybody, I'll let you choose. Whoever wants to go for. Whoever has a question.
I would just make it simple. How are you going to get more people to ride transit? I think that's key. And just in that one simple question, you can go in so many different directions. You can go into, making it so that people, again, they show up at a bus stop and a bus is coming, within 5 minutes. We're building housing, and we're building housing for low income people right near transit. We are, doing VMT and thinking about it that way. You know, just in that one question, I think it allows you to go off into so many different areas, and yeah, I would just keep it simple.
Yeah, I can't pick between these two, so I'll say both of them. One is kind of like Jared's, like how will you improve bus operations in cities? Just because I feel like that's telling, because a lot of times politicians focus on trains because it's like snazzier, but buses a lot of times help inner cities a lot more. And then my other one would just be broadly like, what do you see as the connection between housing and transportation? And I feel like based on the answer to that, I could tell if they get it or not.
And buses in our rural areas too, right? But people forget about the RTAs. That's something that been a transit advocate, you know, or been in Boston and been doing transit advocacy here for 5 years. And it wasn't until the last 2 really years that I started to realize, oh wow, like there are these transit systems for once you get outside of the T, and all of them, 100% of them are all buses. So, you know, making buses work better is really across the urban and rural divide.
Yeah, it's a red flag if the governor doesn't mention RTAs.
Huge.
Well, this is, I mean, my mind is just spinning. I just like, what? Oh my gosh. I mean, well, you know, transparency kills all of this. So, I mean, my go-to would just be, how are you going to make the Massachusetts State House a transparent state house? Because secrets only protect those with secrets. And right now there's a lot of secrets going on that, you know, we've had climate legislation where the report that came out that said 245 climate bills were filed between 2013 and 2018 and only 9 got out. Like, how'd that happen? I don't know, because their secrets protect them. So who knows? So mine would be, how are you going to make Massachusetts State House not only transparent, but actually actionable and accountable?
And then since we have 5 minutes left, what I want to do is a final round of questions where I both combine a question with having you say how people can follow your work after they leave here. So, and sorry for my weird lighting now. I guess the sunshine is a fitting part for the topic. So one, what is the biggest misconception that you need to dispel in your work, that you have to constantly dispel in your work? So what's the biggest kind of like new perspective that people should have to bring? And then 2, how can people follow your work after they leave after they leave here? Who wants to go first?
Okay,
Jack, go.
Yeah, I would just say that the solutions to our transportation problems are hard. They're not hard. They're politically difficult. You know, they cost money, and you have to have someone with vision, but they're not difficult, right? Like, you know, we make bus service excellent. Like we make bus service to the standard that everybody would expect the highway to be, and we make it affordable and cheap. People will use it. You know, we make a commuter rail system that you show up to the platform, there's a train in 15 minutes, it's affordable, you get to Boston in half the time. People will use it and will you know, choose not to use their car. You know, we you know, make it more expensive to go on the highway and during the middle of rush hour. I mean, it's, you know, like I said, these things are not it's not rocket science. That's stuff that we've known, and we just have to get back to it, and we just have to have, you know, politicians with the will to, you know, to do these things. Yeah, and then just, you know, putting equity first. But you can follow me. You can find us at transitmatters.org, where you can sign up for, you know, for newsletters, all that stuff to stay involved. We do events quite often. You can follow me on Twitter for you know, transit hot takes. You know, always having something to say about Charlie Baker, all of that fun stuff, on Twitter at JARJOH.
Awesome. And then Yanisa or Cabell?
Yeah, I can go next. I think it's just something that I'm always emphasizing is how transit policy is, or like transportation policy is climate policy, is housing policy, and like everything is so interconnected. And when we're siloed, like I work in a siloed environment, but like it's like it's so hard to fix an issue without thinking about anything else that's related to it. So just realizing how all those are connected and that like we need density near transit, like that's the only way public transit will work. And just like I keep emphasizing how everything's interconnected and like we need to be tackling this on a system-wide comprehensive level. Yeah, and then I'll drop the links for, you can follow Sunrise Movement and Sunrise Boston or me on Twitter. Yeah, and for older folks on this call, Sunrise is always looking for donations to continue our work and for those under 35, we always welcome new members into Sunrise as well. And I'll also drop my works website on there as well. We do a lot of projects around the region.
Yeah, I echo what my colleague panelists friends here are saying, how intersectional it is. I think for environmentalists, I know we only have a little bit of time, but what I will say is that we have this kind of branding of being just noisemakers, and we're not. We actually have solutions, and we're making noise because we know that we have solutions and you're not making them. Legislators, people, elected officials. So we have the solutions. We are smart. A lot of us are engineers. A lot of us are builders. So I think that's probably the biggest misconception about the work, is that environmentalists are just a bunch of noisemakers, and we're not. We have the solutions, and so do you. So I would say that. And then just on time here, you can always follow me on Twitter. 350 Mass and Better Future Project has websites. We can put all that stuff in the chat. But thanks everybody for being here and for listening to what we're doing, for being interesting.
Awesome. And so if I can say a final thing before I get cut off, I want to thank all our amazing speakers and thank all of our engaged attendees. I will